Hello, everyone. We're about 2 weeks away from the launch of Lord of Hatred, and I am super excited for it, but just wanted to kind of talk about some of the things that I'm hoping War Plans addresses and um, talk about some of the current issues with the current in game loop that Diablo 4 currently has. And yeah, we're gonna just talk about the current gameplay loop, what issues there are with it, how it impacts build variety, and we're gonna see if war plans, what the intended purpose of war plans, if that can address any of those issues. So um, I think one of the biggest issues right now with the current system and gameplay ideology of Diablo 4 is that one build kind of has to be capable of doing everything because, um, while you can typically get most of what you want from any given activity, you still have to be able to. You still have to venture out into these other activities a lot of times to get everything that you need, and it kind of puts a weird constraint on certain play styles. If you have a play style that maybe isn't necessarily as good at bossing, you kind of get put into a weird situation whenever you have to go to a boss fight to farm a specific unique. And generally speaking, I do think it's good when rewards are tied behind specific activities. I just think that it's kind of messy right now in the current system. So, and just to expound further on what I mean when I say everything, nightmare dungeons, hell tides, lair bosses, infernal hordes, the pit. I'm sure I'm forgetting some of the other activities that you do. World bosses is a thing, but there's not really like any like um, you know there's not really anything specifically tied to a world boss. It's kind of just like one of those things that you see and you do it. I guess what was the other one? The whispers is another activity. But a lot of these activities have specific rewards tied behind them, and kind of with the current system, sometimes you're what build you go with. It will kind of heavily influence what the amount of fun that you're able to have in the end game. And I'm going to expound on that a little bit further. Um, the current in game loop. You kind of are just going from one activity to the next, depending on what you need. And it kind of just like turns into this circular motion of like, okay, doing nightmare dungeons, doing hell ties, go here, go there, go there, go here. And it kind of is dictated by what you need. And like I said, that can work. And in such cases like Path of Exile, in a solo self found context, it can be fun and rewarding whenever you actually have to you have to interact with all of the in game systems. I think that in Diablo 4's case, just kind of how the game is balanced and generally the progression of things, this can kind of the value of interacting with the mechanics doesn't reach that same level as it does with other games where you have to interact with mechanics. A lot of the mechanics that you interact with in Path of Exile, there's a lot of depth to it, and you can get really deep into those mechanics, and there's some really interesting outcomes there. But the current system, I feel like in Diablo, where you kind of have to interact with everything, kind of ends up narrowing your focus into what type of character that you want to make. Now, I think there's a couple of issues with that. Like I said, I think that in a lot of contexts, when you have to interact with all the mechanics, that can be a rewarding experience, and it can get you invested in the game because you have to know how the game works. You have to know how these certain mechanics work. And, I don't think it's super controversial for me to say, but the current in-game mechanics of Diablo don't have a whole lot of depth. They're fun. Like the game itself is fun. I would say I do have fun with the game when I play it, but I don't get extremely invested, and I don't stay in the seasons for very long. And I think that a lot of it has to do with just because I'm forced into having to interact with all these mechanics. And I end up feeling punished whenever I decide to go with a build that isn't just able to clear everything super quickly. Now, a lot of people will argue that, you kind of are forging your own type of experience, or when you're comparing yourself with other people's play styles, or say you chose a build, and like say you want to do a whirlwind barb build. That's one of the first things I ever played. A lot of fun. I love that sort of play style. In previous seasons, it was stronger, and just as time goes on, sometimes things get nerfed, sometimes they get buffed. It's just kind of the nature of how these games go. But say you decide to go down that path of being a whirlwind barb, well, it's not as strong as certain other classes, or certain other build archetypes, and it takes you longer to get to certain in-game activities, or progress further. And while I do agree with the point that comparison can be the thief of joy, I've seen that thrown around a lot. I do think that you have to address the elephant in the room, which is that when there are huge disparities in power between builds, and when you're playing a game where you're kind of like forced into like this narrow pathway of having to pick a build that's able to do all content effectively, you can kind of feel it just kind of feels bad inherently. And whether or not you're specifically comparing yourself to the progression of another build, or another creator, or another person, or whatever it may be, you still have to address the elephant in the room, which is that this game is kind of designed around the idea that you kind of have to have something that's able to interact with all of the content. Um, so just getting on to my next point, I think that part of the intended goal of the war plans is to address this um, slightly, and some improvements to the skill tree. I did a previous video talking about the new skill tree, whether or not it was going to have a huge impact on build variety, which I think, based off of what I've seen so far, I do think that it is going to impact it, build variety. I'm hoping that War Plans is also another piece to that puzzle, because, like I said, with the current system, you're kind of forced into this narrow pathway where you have to interact with all the content, so your build kind of has to be able to do it. Now, in Diablo's current state, it's not. I wouldn't say there's much of a difference between clear and single target. I mean, there is obviously a difference in the terminology, and obviously in the application, but the actual like skills themselves and how they interact, there's obviously certain skills that clear better, and you can point to specific examples of builds being better at certain types of content. But um, I'm sorry, I'm kind of getting lost on that thought train there. But anyways, let's just move on. So Warplane specifically, developers have talked a little bit kind of how war plans are going to function. Specifically, they haven't gone into extreme depth. There's been a couple of interviews where they kind of talk about the general idea of it, and it's basically, from my understanding, war plans are basically a way to tailor your in-game experience. So you get to choose your activities, so you still have the same list of activities, but you get to choose which activities you do and what sequence you do them, and then you can get additional rewards whenever you complete the chain of activities. I may be wrong on that. I think based off of what I've seen and what I've researched, that's kind of the gist of it. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound extremely complex or like it's adding a whole lot, because you're basically doing the exact same thing. But I do think sometimes small tweaks or small additions like this can actually have pretty sizable impacts. So here on the left side here, you can kind of just see like the general war plan, like what it looks like. And down here, just like as a disclaimer, they have not final. So this may look different. Also, some of the mechanics, based off of how they've described them, may be slightly different. But you can start like up here. We'll just say like this is a hell tide. You have to kill the commander, and then you have to do a whisper, and then you have to do a nightmare dungeon, and then a layer boss, and then the pit or something. And then at the end, you get a reward. So basically, from what I've seen and what I've gathered in the interviews that I've seen, you kind of get to choose which in-game activity you want to interact with, and the rewards themselves are not going to be locked behind the in-game activities, kind of like they are now. So if you want to do 5 nightmare dungeons in a row, you can. And in turn, you're also juicing rewards because you're getting an additional reward at the end of the chain. And then in this next slide, there's going to be skill trees for each activity now. And this is kind of similar to Last Epoch's in-game skill tree, or even Path of Exile's in-game skill tree. Basically, Path of Exile's Atlas system, rather. So basically, you can add modifiers to specific activities. You can juice the difficulty up, which will then, juice the types of rewards you're getting. And then you can specify what types of rewards that you're getting from the activity based off of some of the examples that we've seen. So, and the more interesting part about this to me, and this is more coming from like a gameplay perspective, is that you can have some, I was reading up on this. I'd seen like a Reddit post where they had translated a German interview regarding this, and they had brought up some kind of example like lair bosses ambushing you during hell tides. Like, to me, that sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds like it would add a lot of challenge, and it actually, to me, sounds like, wow, like I'm actually going to have to think about what I'm doing. Like if I'm going to go in a hell tide, and like the current thing, you basically just blast through everything. That might change if you're just randomly getting ambushed by, a layer boss. So kind of just a before and after here. I found this random picture. I was trying to find some pictures from their promotional material. It's funny now that I'm looking at it, because it doesn't, like on the surface when I'm comparing these two slides, like it doesn't look much different, but it's the context of what I just talked about with the war plans here that kind of has me a little bit more hopeful about what's going to happen. But the basic structure kind of does seem to be the same, but there's going to be some new gameplay elements added to it. So just to finish off here, kind of what I'm hoping all of this does. The more directed progression, I'm hoping that it's giving you things to aspire to, within the skill trees, like, something that you can build up to be able to actually do within a specific activity, not just like get to the end game and be able to farm like all of the end game bosses on tier 4 or whatever. Like you have like aspirational content within each specific activity. Another thing I'm hoping this will encourage is that you can specify, or you have a little bit more of a decision-making process whenever you're choosing what kind of build you're doing. Hell Tides is probably going to favor builds that have a little bit of a combination of single target and clearing ability. So you may want to, if you really enjoy Hell Tides, you may want to think about what kind of character that you can build that is suited for that type of content. And just, that these points kind of go together, but that kind of encourages specializing in content. So um, and there's always going to be metas that form out of these things. You're not ever going to be able to perfectly balance anything, but I think that when you give players agency in the ability to kind of customize their in-game experience, and making their decisions matter more, it one, I think, will translate into more player retention, but overall I think it's just a better experience, because you have to think about what you're doing. So those are my hopes. I think that based off of what they've shown so far, while they haven't like fully gone into depth and explained every single nuance to it, which we wouldn't want them to, we want a little bit of an element of surprise. I do think that it is trending in that direction. I think that it will address these points, maybe not fully, but at least slightly. And this is a system that can be built on over time. It's an easily adjusted system. I think they can always add things there. They can always tune things here. And based off of what they've described, I think it can be it can provide some meaningful impact. So just to wrap up here, I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on it. I'd love to, have a discussion with everybody, if you agree or disagree, maybe some of the things that you guys would like to see. And I was trying out a little bit of a different video format today, with this slide presentation. So, if you guys like that, let me know. I can make more content like that. And, if you want to like and subscribe, that always feels awkward to say, but if you would like to, you can do that. That would help me out, kind of give me an idea of if this content's hitting home for anybody. Anyways, that's it for me. Hope everybody has a great day.